For the Investing News Network, I am Brian McGovern. I'm joined today by Kacey Morrissey, Senior Director of Industry Analytics with New Frontier Data. Kacey, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kacey, we're going to be talking about the big night for cannabis in terms of the election results. At this moment in time, we still don't know yet who will be president of the US. But on a big picture level, can you talk about the takeaways that you first had in terms of the results from the state ballots?
Sure. So as far as an election year, 2020 is the most consequential election that we've seen for cannabis. It first off was a clean sweep for cannabis legalization. The 5 markets that had cannabis legalization initiatives on their ballots all passed. Most notably New Jersey and Arizona, which passed adult use measures, which brings the total percentage of Americans who live in a legal cannabis state market to 71% of the total US population. It is now over a third of all Americans live in a legal adult use market where they can now purchase, recreational cannabis, or will soon be able to purchase recreational cannabis. The second part of that, that makes this election so consequential has to do with the way in which the states pass. So we see in South Dakota, this is now the first example of a state basically bypassing medical legalization first before passing adult use legalization. So, South Dakota is sort of setting a precedent in this way for how to legalize, whereas we've seen every other state market that's legalized in the past has legalized medical use first, usually under restrictive measures, more restrictive regulations that then get turned over, and eventually an adult use measure makes it on the ballot. South Dakota did not do it that way. They passed both med and rec at the same exact time, and it's still early. We're going to see how this state rolls out, but that was definitely a consequential part of this election. We also in Arizona passing adult use, now breaks the red wall in our minds. We've seen that most historically conservative states, take longer to pass adult use, or most have not yet at this point. Arizona failed to pass their adult use measure in 2016. And now that they've passed their adult use measure in 2020, and so has South Dakota and Montana, 2 other historically conservative states, which really bodes well for the industry in terms of, conservative states turning over, and really shows us that cannabis, the appetite for cannabis, the interest in cannabis is, doesn't really have to do with political party at this point. It's a bipartisan issue that most Americans support. And the other part of that that's really consequential for 2020 has to do with New Jersey and really breaking open the market in the Northeast. We're going to see, as we've seen in other parts of the country, when a state legalizes adult use around other states that have, restrictive medical programs, that sort of forces the states that are on the border of that newly legalized states to start to reconsider their own cannabis policies. New Jersey being surrounded by New York and Pennsylvania, I fully believe that in the next few years, maybe next 18 months, we're going to see some action in New York and Pennsylvania in terms of pushing adult use legalization. Pennsylvania has, we've seen some growth in Pennsylvania's program since they've legalized medical, and being, with our Philadelphia being right on the border of New Jersey, we see, the potential for a lot of cannabis tourism coming from Philadelphia and Pennsylvania over to New Jersey, and sort of taking away from what was projected medical growth in Pennsylvania's market. I mean, it will depend on some other things, counter prices, taxes, et cetera, that roll out of New Jersey, to sort of create that competition with what's happening in PA. But in general, New Jersey passing is a major, major turning point for the industry in breaking open the Northeast for adult use legalization.
That's very interesting. I'm wondering if you can speak about the impact that a legalization market has on the consumers. The New Frontier Data published a report in the lead up to the election talking about how significant it is for people to feel more comfortable in a market that is now legalized to experiment with the product, or even if they're still going to stay away from it, feel good that others are doing so. With these new state policies, especially the ones you mentioned in traditionally conservative marketplaces, how do you view that change in perspective regarding the cannabis as a viable product?
Well, we see growth in legal markets coming from 2 places. There's the conversion of already existing cannabis consumers who currently purchase from the illicit market, now converting over to purchase from the legal market. And we see the influx of absolutely new cannabis consumers who are drawn in by the fact that it's A, legal, and B, available, and C, safe. So as far as consumers go, the large part of growth we see from the conversion of existing consumers. And we see that that conversion happens when tax policies are in place that create retail counter prices that are competitive with the illicit market. So in states where they carefully consider the elasticity of demand and people's price sensitivity to cannabis and really consider the illicit market, those types of tax policies create prices that are then competitive and can allow for a quicker conversion of these already existing illicit market consumers to purchase from the legal market. As far as new consumers, we do see in these states, especially when we're in a place that's more conservative and there are less reported numbers of cannabis consumers, the legalization creates, like you said, a more safe environment. They feel better about purchasing from a legal market where products have been tested. There's a variety of products that include non-smokable forms, edibles, tablets, pills, that sort of thing.
The overall U.S. cannabis market has often been described as the Wild West in terms of its policies, in terms of the fractured state of it all. From the smallest brand in the niche market to the biggest multi-state operator out there in the public markets today, these kind of variances in policy and the different ways that they affect the business day to day, they've been described as good, as bad, as in between. With this rollout of continuous state ballots and state policies, can you sort of compare the two between, as I said, we still don't have a clear indication of who will be the next president of the U.S., but the idea of sweeping federal legalization is one that the industry has toyed with or pursued. Can you maybe compare the two of how that would apply if, say, the states continue to roll out their products and their policies as they wish compared to an overall national policy?
Well, as far as we see with the two presidential candidates and the potential control of the Senate by Republicans, we are very much in the camp that the status quo will remain for the foreseeable future. Joe Biden has been, throughout his political career, not in support of cannabis, has supported law enforcement policies and has generally rejected federal cannabis reform. He's, softened his stance since he's now the top of the Democratic ticket. He has made part of his official policy decriminalization and the expungement of criminal records relating to cannabis. But at the same time, we still have to look at his past record. And even if they do a federal decriminalization, we don't see there being federal legalization or an implementation of anything that would then create sort of an interstate commerce or something like that. So we really see it being left to the states and the status quo remaining for the next couple of years.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. In terms of your outlook for future states to watch out for, what are some of the other states that maybe now that we've gotten the results from these ones, that you're looking forward to?
So on the medical side, it's going to be a toss-up. I mean, we're now at 37 legal markets, 37 legal state markets. I mean, Mississippi is a surprise, again, like we've been talking about, historically conservative states. I think it'll just be up in the air as to which ones determine medical legalization, but we see a lot of pressure happening for adult use legalization, like I said, around New Jersey. New York, which had some momentum, a little over a year ago, where they were considering, along with New Jersey, when New Jersey got stalled the first time, to be considering adult use legalization. And also Pennsylvania, we've seen our governor has been heavily in support of legalization in Pennsylvania, full legalization. So we're really looking in the Northeast now. New York and PA are kind of where we're focusing our attention as a potential next adult use market.
Last thing, I'm wondering if from the new states that implemented cannabis markets, if you expect to see one that maybe people are not paying too much attention to, or as you mentioned, companies will sometimes focus on the more dense markets or citywide. Is there any one of these from these new ones that maybe could pull up an Oklahoma in terms of a surprising, developing, thriving cannabis market?
So Oklahoma is just a very interesting case as a medical-only market. I mean, I'm sure that since you've mentioned it, that you've read up and you know a lot about what's happening in Oklahoma. We don't see Mississippi, which is the only state that legalized just medical this election. We don't see Mississippi turning around and becoming an Oklahoma at this point. We haven't seen anything that would suggest that their regulations would be as loose as Oklahoma's to allow for such participation levels that we've seen in Oklahoma. However, it looks like in New Jersey, as far as adult use, that they have been sensitive in discussing their tax policy, and that we are going to see competitive pricing because their taxes are very low, or they're considering a tax rate for adult use that's going to be very low. So we expect extremely high participation in New Jersey's market, and it looks at this point in time like the taxation policy isn't going to be a major hindrance to program growth.
Kacey, as I mentioned a little while ago, New Frontier Data published a very thorough report about the impact that all these state ballots passing would have on all kinds of aspects. When it comes to the financial side, there was a projection of an increase of revenue in the U.S. for 3.3 billion by 2025. If those had gone through, they did. What kind of encouragement do you feel like the industry will see now in terms of potential added investment, potential new entries into the market, and just general sort of operational growth?
I think that this is extremely consequential. I think it's going to be huge. I think New Jersey being such a large state in terms of population and breaking open that beachhead for adult use legalization in the Northeast, that we're going to see a lot of interest, more than we've seen before in the cannabis industry. This election overwhelmingly was great for cannabis. We see investment in the industry going up, attention to the industry going up, and for those well-positioned multi-state operators who operate in these new markets, there are a couple that are in multiple markets that now include Arizona, and there's one operator, Curaleaf, which exists in both New Jersey and Arizona. These multi-state operators that are both best positioned in these new markets are going to experience some great growth as far as their public stock.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much, Kacey. For the Investing News Network, I am Brian McGovern. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for a lot more interviews. See you next time.